It's Game Boy Micro.
Hey everyone, back in the day, a handheld I really wanted was the Game Boy Micro, a really small portable that played GBA games. I had so many chances to get it, but I just didn't pull the trigger on getting it. Well, fast forward to today, and I finally got something like it, the TRIMUI Smart. It's not quite a Game Boy Micro, but it's a very small ultra portable device that runs a variety of emulators all the way up to the PS1. In this video, I'm going to do a full review of this little handheld and let you guys know about the pros and cons. Okay, if you guys like the video, make sure to hit that like button, also subscribe if you haven't already, and check out the Discord channel, link is in the description below. Okay, let's do a quick unboxing, and there's not much to see here. You get a tiny USB-C cable for charging, a manual, and the device itself. The boot time is really quick, less than 10 seconds to get into the system, and that's helped by a very quick, unbloated but functional OS. Now for a quick rundown of the specs. The TRIMUI has an ARM A7 at 1.5 GHz. I'm led to believe that this is a dual-core processor, but I haven't been able to confirm this. There's 128 megabytes of RAM, which sounds low, but it's more than enough for the emulators it's going to run. There's 8 gigabytes of storage, and they also threw in a free 32 gigabytes micro SD card, which comes with a lot of games included. There is a 2.4-inch IPS LCD with a resolution of 240 by 320. There's 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi on board, which in this case is really just used for over-the-air updates or using two devices for Wi-Fi versus. There's also Bluetooth as well, which is useful for connecting Bluetooth headphones, and note there is no 3.5mm headphone jack. There's a built-in 1000 mAh battery, which is good enough for around 3 to 4 hours of gaming. In terms of form factor, I think this is one of the strengths of the handheld. I think it's very well designed. For example, the 2.4-inch LCD screen might seem small, but is actually pretty functional for most of the games I've tested, and I never felt like the games or the text were too small. Secondly, it's about as comfortable as it's going to get for a small device. Being a landscape style device, it's just way more comfortable than say the Miyoo Mini, which looks really cute, but isn't that practical. That doesn't necessarily mean it's better than the Miyoo Mini, but it definitely scores more points for comfort. Let's take a quick walk around the handheld. There's just 2 shoulder buttons here, so it's absolutely fine for SNES games, but it might be a problem for PS1 games that uses all 4 shoulder buttons. All the buttons are dome-style switches, so fairly clicky like Switch Joy-Con buttons. It's fine, though I do prefer conductive rubber these days, like a Switch Lite. Below the screen is select, menu, and start buttons. On the bottom of the console, there's a micro SD card slot and a USB-C port for charging, but not data transfer. There's also no 3.5mm headphone jack, which I think is important to say again because I really missed it. And you might have also noticed there's no volume buttons, and this was something I never thought I'd miss, but I found not having it pretty inconvenient as you have to exit out to the menu to change the volume. And speaking of sound, there's a software bug with the background menu music, where the music will start playing after playing a game even when it's set to 0. This can be a bit annoying because the background music is essentially a 1-minute loop that gets old pretty fast. This should be a pretty easy software fix, but it does show how useful it can be to have hardware buttons for volume. Now, given there's no custom firmware yet, all that we can do right now is go through the official OS and the emulators that are present here. And to be fair, I think they've done a pretty good job in terms of the out-of-the-box experience. I think there are things that serious fans will want fixed, but for casual fans that aren't so picky, I think it will be fine. So one issue I found was the resolution scaling. The screen resolution is 240 by 320, that's a pretty low resolution, but it looks sharp here because the pixel per inch, or PPI, is high enough that it's not pixelated. However, having that small resolution means that it can be problematic with various retro systems and their existing game resolutions. And if you want razor sharp pixels, you typically want the screen resolution to be a simple whole number factor of the resolution of the system. So GBA, for example, if you turn on integer scaling, the original GBA resolution was 240 by 160. However, the screen resolution here is 320 by 240, and it's not a whole number factor, so the game display will be really small because it's displaying 240 by 160. If you turn off integer scaling, then that 240-160 image gets stretched to fill the screen, and this will be good enough for most people, but it's not perfectly sharp. Now, on a lot of custom firmwares for other handhelds, there are video filters or shaders that can be used to increase the sharpness of the image when it's been stretched, but there's no custom firmware right now, and there's no knowing if there ever will be. So for now, if you buy this device, you're just going to have to roll with a screen that's stretched out and games that are a little pixelated. That said, the screen quality and colors are pretty good, so at least in terms of hardware quality, I think it's fine, and we'll just have to hope for some shaders to make this little console even better. Let's run through some game testing, and I tested all the emulators on this device. I'm not going to go through every one, but I will point out the ones that were more interesting for me. Arcade games are really good on here. I played through most of the Street Fighter games from CPS1 to CPS3, and they all ran really well. Now, I don't test Atari often because I didn't grow up in that era, but seeing as they were included here, I thought I'd give them a shot. I'm not sure the games I tried won me over, but it was interesting to check out. For Famicom or Nintendo, a lot of the ROMs included were Japanese ones, so you may want to rearrange and copy your own ROMs over to the SD card, and we'll go through how after the testing, but overall Famicom played as expected. Game Boy was a little disappointing. With integer scaling turned on, the screen is extremely small, so I think most people will just play this at full screen. Also, one feature that's missing is Game Boy color palettes that can change the look of the game. For me, I really like experimenting with different color palettes, and it makes Game Boy a lot more fun to play, and hopefully this is included with an update. Game Boy Advance is pretty good. I'm looking forward to playing a number of games on this, and I feel like if you ever missed out on a Game Boy Micro, this might be the closest thing to actually getting one. As I mentioned before, the original GBA resolution is 240 by 160, so you have to compromise a bit here. Either play the games full screen and stretched, resulting in a bit of the final image being a bit pixelated, or play them at their original resolution with integer scaling turned on. Personally, I'm just going with full screen, and the experience is mostly fine, though sometimes it is a little obvious, especially if the game has a lot of text and it can look a little uneven. Neo Geo runs great here, and I do like how with Neo Geo there are larger character sprites and it looks really good. It's kinda crazy that a state-of-the-art arcade machine from 30 years ago is now playable on a micro device. Moving on to PlayStation, probably the most taxing of the systems on offer here, also plays flawlessly. While you won't be able to play every PS1 game because L2, R2 and the analog sticks are missing, there should be enough playable games. It probably would have been a good idea to include L2 and R2 at least, much like the Miyoo Mini. Finally, Super Nintendo played really well. This system is perfect for those games given it has all the controls needed. Super Castlevania and Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island plays really smoothly, so I expect most of the other games to run well. Before we end this review, one other thing to show you guys is that it's really simple to add your own ROMs. Take the micro SD card out and put it into a micro SD card reader and stick it into your PC. Then just navigate over to the ROMs directory and put your ROMs into their corresponding folder. There's about 8 GB free on this card, so you can still put plenty of your own ROMs on. For PS1, while all the files here are PBP extensions, I've been able to use .bin and .q files too. Also very important, make sure after putting the micro SD card back into the handheld, you go over to the settings and refresh ROMs list, otherwise your games won't show up. So final thoughts on this little console. I quite like it, but it's not perfect. There are some flaws with this device. There's enough power here for PS1, but there's no L2, R2 buttons and analog sticks. I think just having L2 and R2 would have increased its potential a lot, but there's still a lot of PS1 games I can play without those buttons. Also, there are noticeable hardware functions missing, like headphone jack and volume controls. In terms of fixable flaws, hopefully they update the device to remove the background music issue and include some shaders that will improve the screen scaling and game experience. And lastly, I haven't talked much about the price, but I bought it for $80 including shipping, and I think that's kind of expensive. It's really going to depend on if you want that micro handheld experience or not, because for a very similar price, you can get an Anbernic RG351P, which is a little bigger and not really an ultra portable, but it fixes all of those flaws I just mentioned. As it stands, the TRIMUI Smart is still a nice console with a lot of power and a very cool novelty handheld. That's it for this one. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.